Welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha, a podcast shared by David Roylance. This podcast is dedicated to guiding you to completely eliminate the discontent mind and the suffering it causes by attaining enlightenment. Learn and practice the teachings of Gotama Buddha that will guide you to fully attain a peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. To support this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha or visit buddhadailywisdom.com, where you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online learning resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Now, here's our teacher to share more.
Sawadee Kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our Pali Canon and English study group, and we study the words of the Buddha. We're in Volume 8, which is titled The Foremost Householders. We're going to be studying chapters 11 through 20 today, where you can see the original words of the Buddha to be able to learn, reflect, and practice his teachings and see more and more of the results of the enlightened mind, where the mind's moving to this peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. So I'd like to welcome all of you, whether you're joining for the first time or you've been joining regularly. I'm going to be using some visual aids here to be able to help us to see the original words of the Buddha. And what I'll do is I'll read a chapter from the book, then I will teach on that particular chapter, and then open up to any questions that you guys might have related to that specific chapter. The very first chapter that we have is chapter 11. This one is titled The Foremost, the Best, the Distinguished, the Supreme, and the Finest Householder. Here's the words of the Buddha. Householder, the one enjoying sensual pleasures, who seeks wealth rightly, without violence, and makes himself joyful and pleased, and shares it, and does meritorious deeds, and uses that wealth without being tied to it, obsessed with it, and blindly absorbed in it, seeing the danger in it, and understanding the escape. He may be praised on 4 grounds. The first ground on which he may be praised is that he seeks wealth righteously, without violence. The second ground on which he may be praised is that he makes himself joyful and pleased. The third ground on which he may be praised is that he shares the wealth and does meritorious deeds. The fourth ground on which he may be praised is that he uses that wealth without being tied to it, obsessed with it, and blindly absorbed in it, seeing the danger in it, and understanding the escape. This person who enjoys sensual pleasures may be praised on these 4 grounds. This householder is the foremost, the best, the distinguished, the supreme, and the finest person of person who enjoys sensual pleasures. Just as from a cow comes milk, from milk curd, from curd butter, from butter ghee, and from ghee comes cream of ghee, which is reckoned the foremost of all of these, so too this kind of person who enjoys sensual pleasures is the foremost, the best, the distinguished, the supreme, and the finest of all those who seek wealth righteously, without violence, and having obtained it, makes himself joyful and pleased, and shares the wealth, and does meritorious deeds, and uses that wealth without being tied to it, obsessed with it, and blindly absorbed in it, seeing the danger in it and understanding the escape. So here the Buddha is explaining 4 things that a household practitioner should consider practicing as a way of becoming a deeper and deeper practitioner of the household practitioners. There's ordained practitioners and there's household practitioners. This particular book has a collection of teachings that are about household practitioners. Here he's giving 4 things that one might consider practicing, and by doing so, it's helping you to move the mind closer and closer to enlightenment, where the mind can be peaceful and joyful. This first one that he talks about is that one is obtaining their wealth without violence, meaning that they're not harming others through the acquiring of any type of income. This is taught as part of right livelihood in the Eightfold Path. In the Eightfold Path, the Buddha gives 5 aspects of wrong livelihood that would cause harm to others, because any harm that you cause, whether it's through your intention, speech, actions, or livelihood, this is all going to come back to you. So you're interested in ensuring that you're not having business in weapons, business in living beings, business in meat, business in substances that cause heedlessness, and business in poisons. Any of these are going to be causing harm, which means you're sustaining your life in acquiring an income by causing harm. Therefore, harm is going to come back to you as part of your life, because you're making unwise decisions that are not based in the natural law of karma and how to make wise decisions to produce wholesome results. The next part that the Buddha talks about is that a household practitioner would make themselves joyful and pleased. This is essentially what the enlightened mind is going to be experiencing all the time. That if you can uplift the mind and maintain the joyfulness, and the mind is pleased, and the mind isn't disgruntled or irritated or agitated, this is what the enlightened mind is experiencing, because an enlightened mind isn't going to experience any agitation or displeasure. Even the slightest bad mood is eliminated from the enlightened mind. So by going throughout your day, having an uplifted mind where the mind is joyful and pleased, this will help you to conduct your life and maintain the calmness and composure of the mind, because you're able to maintain your joy. The third aspect that the Buddha is talking about here is that one does meritorious deeds with the wealth that you acquire. What meritorious deeds are these are generous deeds that are directed towards the continuation of the teachings of the Buddha. In order to get to enlightenment, an individual would need to practice generosity. This is the giving and sharing of more than is strictly required in any given situation, such as your time, effort, energy, and resources. And you shouldn't have any expectation of anything in return. As soon as you have an expectation, it's not generosity. It's not pure generosity, because there's still a craving, desire, attachment there that you're wanting something back. So in order to get to enlightenment, an individual would need to practice generosity. But then there's a specific type of generosity that is called merit, or here the Buddha is referring to it as meritorious deeds, where you're practicing your generosity towards the continued sharing of the teachings of the Buddha, because that helps others to gain access to the path to enlightenment and understanding the teachings that one would need in order to improve the condition of the mind. This is how the teachings have survived for 2,500 years, is all throughout history, people have been practicing merit by making generous offerings to allow the teachings to continue. The fourth aspect that the Buddha is talking about here is that by not being tied to your wealth, not being obsessed by it or blindly absorbed in it, and seeing the danger in it. Essentially, if your mind is tied to your wealth, that means when your bank account is maybe at one balance, you get happy or excited if it's higher. And then if your bank balance drops down, then maybe you're sad or frustrated or irritated. This is where the mind becomes tied to their wealth or obsessed in the wealth and maybe chasing after wealth. And it's important to see the danger in this, that the mind is going to go up and down and up and down. And then the Buddha talks about understanding the escape. The escape from this is the Eightfold Path. If you understand the Eightfold Path, in that this is the path to eliminate craving, desire, attachment, then you know that this is the escape from the obsession of money, but also anything else. Another word for obsession would be craving, desire, attachment, that mental longing and strong eagerness. So if your mind is attached to anything at all, including wealth, then you're not going to be able to experience enlightenment. So it's a matter of pursuing things as a goal, objective, or interest, rather than with craving, desire, attachment, where the mind's longing, yearning, and chasing after things. But also, if you sat around and did nothing, then you wouldn't be able to sustain your life and move your life forward. So here the Buddha's describing how to ensure that you're practicing the escape, which is the Eightfold Path. So then the Buddha goes on to talk about a foremost householder in terms of this improvement of milk, going from milk to milk curd to curd butter, butter ghee to ghee and cream of ghee. This is something that people would have understood during his lifetime, because the vast majority of the people were farmers, and they were doing all these various chores in their day-to-day life that would be able to sustain their life. So they would understand that you can take milk and you can purify it and make it better and better and better, and you can get this better and better product of cream of ghee. And this is what the Buddha is describing, that a household practitioner who's practicing these four things, it's like becoming a better and better and better household practitioner. So these are four things that you might consider to practice, of ensuring that you're not acquiring wealth through violence, ensuring that you're practicing where your mind is joyful and pleased and uplifted, that any kind of wealth that you are gaining, that you consider practicing developing merit and sharing some of that in order to help individuals to gain access to the teachings of the Buddha. And then be sure that you're not obsessed with any kind of wealth or money that you're acquiring, and that you see this danger in having all this wealth and allowing the mind to be attached to it. You can be enlightened and rich. It's possible. It's possible to be wealthy, but you need to be sure your mind's not obsessed with the wealth. And in order to accomplish that, you would need to understand the escape, which is the Eightfold Path. That's how you practice to eliminate any kind of craving, desire, attachment, including one's mind might be attached to wealth. Let me know what questions you guys have on this by putting your questions into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Or if you're in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand and ask any questions or follow-up questions directly. All right, I'm not seeing any questions here, so I'm going to move on to the next chapter. Those of you guys that are in Zoom, if there's ever a time you guys would like to read any of these chapters, you're welcome to volunteer by electronically raising your hand, and you're welcome to read any of these chapters. Chapter 12 is titled, More Terrible and Frightful Than the Great Inferno. Monks, there exists a hell named the Great Inferno. There, whatever form one sees with the eye is undesirable, never desirable, unlovely, never lovely, disagreeable, never agreeable. Here the Buddha is going to just repeat this for each of the sense bases of the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, and then the mind itself. And then when this was said, a certain monk said to the perfectly enlightened one, "That inferno, Venerable Sir, is indeed terrible. That inferno is indeed very terrible. But is there, Venerable Sir, any other inferno more terrible and frightful than that one?" "There is, monk. But what, Venerable Sir, is that inferno that is terrible and frightful than that one?" "Those ascetics or Brahmins, monk, who do not understand as it really is. This is discontentedness. This is the cause of discontentedness. This is the elimination of discontentedness. This is the way leading to the elimination of discontentedness. They delight in volitional formations, choices, decisions that lead to birth, in volitional formations that lead to aging, in volitional formations that lead to death, in volitional formations that lead to sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. Delighting in such volitional formations, choices, decisions, they generate volitional formations that lead to birth, generate volitional formations that lead to aging, generate volitional formations that lead to death, generate volitional formations that lead to sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. Having generated such volitional formations, choices, decisions, that are burnt by the inferno of birth, burnt by the inferno of aging, burnt by the inferno of death, burnt by the inferno of sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. They are not freed from birth, aging, and death, not freed from sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair, not freed from discontentedness, I say. So here the Buddha is sharing with a student about the hell realm. And the Buddha taught 5 different realms during his lifetime: hell, animal, afflicted spirits, human realm, and heavenly realm. all of these beings are in the same time and space. They're all on the same plane. It's not like they're in far distant places. Just like there's a human being sitting in this chair, there could be an animal that sits here once the human being gets up. Same thing, hell beings, afflicted spirits, and heavenly beings are all among us, just like animals and humans are all among us as well. And the Buddha needed to teach this because this is part of the natural laws of existence. He never used rebirth as part of either scaring somebody or guilting or shaming or fearing them into learning his teachings, and he never used that rebirth in the heavenly realm as a way to incentivize somebody to learn and practice his teachings, because the whole goal in the path to enlightenment is to get to enlightenment so that there isn't any rebirth anywhere in any of these different realms. But as part of the natural laws of existence, he needed to teach these various realms, because as your mind becomes more and more awake and the pollution is coming out, you might actually experience interaction with these beings. These beings can communicate to you, you can communicate with them. You might actually see some of these beings. They might try to influence you in either positive or negative ways. So it's important to understand the cycle of rebirth as part of your journey to enlightenment. So he's explaining about this great inferno of hell. And during the lifetime of the Buddha, he segmented hell into many different hells, and there were many different heavens as well. So here he's describing that there's this great inferno that essentially is a place that you wouldn't be interested to be. And then the student asked him, is there another place that is worse than that is more terrible than this great hell? And the Buddha says, yes, there is. And here you can see that he's not trying to push or force what he has to say on the student. He just says, there is, monk. He just leaves it at that. And then he waits for another question. And then his student asked, but what, venerable sir, is that inferno more terrible and frightful than that one? So now the Buddha answers it. He says, those ascetics and Brahmins who don't understand as it really is, this is discontentedness. And he goes through these 4 statements. This is pointing to the Four Noble Truths. He's saying, if someone doesn't understand the Four Noble Truths, this is worse than being in hell. Because if you don't understand the Four Noble Truths, then you haven't had the breakthrough yet to understanding what is causing your discontent feelings. And what the unenlightened mind will typically do is it will blame other people for the feelings that one is experiencing. And then you either push people away, you'll become bitter and harsh and hostile and aggressive with them, or you will put your expectations on other people, trying to control them to do things your way. And as long as you don't understand the Four Noble Truths, it can be equated to like living in hell, because you're going to continue to experience over and over and over and over and over again this sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. That the mind is just going to be experiencing painful feelings or discontentedness over and over and over and over and over again. So having the breakthrough to understanding what's causing the discontent feelings and how to eliminate them is so important. And it's described in the Four Noble Truths, which I discuss in multiple programs, courses, and retreats that I share. And if one doesn't understand the Four Noble Truths, they're going to continue to make choices and decisions that lead to continuous birth, continuous aging, and continuous death. Not only this discontentedness is going to be experienced in this life over and over and over and over again, but you don't have the wisdom to understand what's causing your discontentedness, so you can't eliminate the craving, desire, attachment. Those are the causes and conditions that are causing the discontentedness, but it's also the causes and conditions that are causing rebirth to occur. So the Four Noble Truths is giving you a very important piece of information, which is craving, desire, attachment, the mental longing, strong eagerness, the chasing after the objects of your affection. This is what's causing the discontent mind, those discontent feelings to arise. And that's also what's causing rebirth, so that one is now stuck in this continuous cycle of being born over and over and over and over again. So the Buddha is explaining that if you can understand that, then you'll be able to escape it. But having not understood the Four Noble Truths, you wouldn't be able to escape it, and thus it's like burning in hell is what he's describing. So let me know what questions you guys have on this chapter. This is chapter 12, more terrible and frightful than the great inferno. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next chapter, which is chapter 13. Chapter 13 is titled Four Qualities of a Wholesome Person. Here, the Buddha is going to help you understand some various aspects and qualities to practice in order to practice being a wholesome person. Monks, one who possesses four qualities can be understood to be a wholesome person. What for? 1. Here, monks, a wholesome person does not disclose the faults of others, even when asked about them, how much less than when not asked. But when he is asked about them, then led on by questions, he speaks about the faults of others with gaps and omissions, not fully or in detail. It can be understood this individual is a wholesome person. 2. Again, a wholesome person discloses the virtues of others, even when not asked about them. How much more than when asked? But when he is asked about them, then led on by questions, he speaks about the virtues of others without gaps or omissions, fully or in detail. It can be understood this individual is a wholesome person. 3. Again, a wholesome person discloses his own faults, even when not asked about them. How much more than when asked? But when he is asked about them, then led on by questions, he speaks about his own faults without gaps and omissions, fully and in detail. It can be understood this individual is a wholesome person. Again, a wholesome person does not disclose his own virtues, even when asked about them, how much less than when not asked. But when he is asked about them, led on by questions, he speaks about his own virtues with gaps and omissions, not fully or in detail. It can be understood this individual is a wholesome person. One who possesses these four qualities can be understood as a wholesome person. So here, the Buddha is describing in these first two aspects of a wholesome person, he's describing an individual who is not openly talking about the faults of others. Essentially, what this comes down to is like the gossip and slander. If there's gossip and slander, and you're doing that with others, and you're gossiping and slandering others, this is causing harm. So what you would like to do is practice in such a way that you're not disclosing the faults and mistakes or problematic aspects of one's character towards others. Because if you do that, you're causing harm to someone's reputation. And by causing harm to someone's reputation, then that harm is going to be interested to then come back to you, because now you causing harm through your speech and perhaps even your actions. So it would be wise to not cause harm to others through your speech. And the Buddha teaches this as part of right speech, as a fundamental teaching that he shares as part of the Eightfold Path. In the Eightfold Path, he talks about eliminating lying, slander, talks about eliminating harsh speech as well as frivolous speech. So if you are practicing right speech, then you would already be practicing something like this. So there's never a time where it would be wise to go around and talk in unwholesome ways about other people. Now, the one thing that you might encounter is that if you're in a work environment, for example, a boss might come to you and ask for your opinion about a certain coworker that you're working with. Maybe they're up for a promotion, or maybe they're on a probationary employment and they're interested in trying to determine whether or not they should hire this person full time. In these situations, you might need to share some certain advice or certain background or feedback of how a person might need to improve. But it's important for you in your practice to do this in an uplifting way, in a positive way, where if you were degrading and diminishing, this would be harmful to that individual, and it would also be harmful to you as well. So it would be wise for you to just maintain your practice of right speech, where what you say is spoken at the right time, what you say is true, gentle, beneficial, and with a mind of loving kindness. This is part of the 5 factors of well-spoken speech. So this first part that the Buddha is describing is to ensure that you're not speaking with gossip and slander, and that as you do need to say things in a certain situation, that you don't speak in degrading and diminishing ways. This would produce the best results for you in your life based on the natural law of karma. And then the last two, number 3 and 4, here what he's talking about is a way to talk without having arrogance or conceit or boastfulness. Whereas if you were a person who discloses your own faults, even when not asked about them, how much more than when asked? But when he is asked about them, then led on to questions, he speaks about his own faults without gaps and omissions, fully and in detail. This is a person who doesn't have ego, who doesn't have arrogance, that's willing to admit their mistakes and their challenges. So once again, if you're in a situation where maybe you're an employee and you're in a review where your manager is asking you, like, what are your challenges? What are your goals? What are your objectives? What are you working on? If you can openly speak about these things without having any discontentedness and without any arrogance and pride, then this can be really helpful for you and for your mind. And that next part that he's talking about is the same thing in terms of your virtues. That if you were asked, what are your virtues? What are the things that you have a lot of background in, or a lot of knowledge on, or a lot of insight in? Well, if you were very boastful in the way that you spoke, this would cause you difficulties in your relationships, either personally or professionally. So you'd like to remain humble as you speak in certain ways, in certain environments, and keep this in mind. So what questions do you guys have on this chapter? This is chapter 13. You can ask questions by putting those into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Or if you're in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand and ask any questions or follow-up questions directly. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next one, which is actually very similar to the one we just read. This is chapter 14, 4 qualities of an unwholesome person. Here the Buddha is just saying essentially the exact same thing, but he's saying it in the opposite way. The first time he worded it from the perspective of a wholesome person, this time he's wording it in the perspective of an unwholesome person. So I'm not going to read this. You can understand it's the same teaching, that an unwholesome person would disclose the faults of others. The unwholesome person does not disclose the virtues of another person. An unwholesome person does not disclose their own faults. An unwholesome person discloses their own virtues, even when not asked about them. This is like being boastful and arrogant. So we'll just go on through that. You can see here that you have words from me to help you in the book to be able to learn what is being shared here. So now we move on to chapter 15. This one is titled, With an Unaffected Mind, Residing Compassionate. Here the Buddha is talking to one of his students, Phaguna. If anyone speaks critical in your presence, you should abandon any desire and any thoughts based on the household life. Herein, you should train thus, my mind will remain unaffected, and I shall speak no evil words. I shall reside compassionate for his welfare, with a mind of loving kindness, without inner hate. That is how you should train Phaguna. If anyone should give you a blow with his hand, with a clod, with a stick, or with a knife, you should abandon any desires and any thoughts based on the household life. And herein you should train thus, my mind will be unaffected, and I shall speak no evil words. I shall reside compassionate for his welfare, with a mind of loving kindness, without inner hate. That is how you should train Phaguna. So here the Buddha is explaining that if people do harmful things, that it's important for your mind to remain unaffected. Here in a moment, you're going to see he's talking about speech and other things like this. But what it's important to understand is that if somebody's being hateful towards you, if you're just hateful back to them, it's not going to extinguish it. It's just going to keep it going. It's like somebody picks up a rubber ball and they bounce it around in the room. If you pick up the rubber ball and you throw it, then they pick up the rubber ball and they throw it. Next thing you know, you've got rubber balls bouncing all around in the room. But if somebody's being argumentative, or here the Buddha's talking about physical blows, if somebody was physical with you and you became physical back and aggressive and hostile and bitter, then that's just going to keep it going. The best thing you can do in a physical altercation, if somebody's coming at you physically, is just go in the opposite direction. Just get as far away as you can. If there's ego in the mind, you might have difficulties getting away. You might feel like you need to stand there and fight and stand up for yourself. Well, there's no benefit in that. If someone's going to be aggressive physically and using any of these weapons that the Buddha is talking about, it's better to just get out of there and completely remove the body and the mind from that situation. There's a whole lot of decisions that we make that lead up to these kinds of situations. For example, if we went out really late at night, if we went to a place where they're taking substances that cause heedlessness, if we're there until closing time and now there's a bunch of people that are heedless or intoxicated out in a parking lot and then you get attacked, there was a whole lot of decisions that were leading up to that. So there's a lot of decisions you can make that can ensure that you don't get into a situation by using right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, and other things like this. You can ensure that you're less and less likely to be in that type of experience. But if you do end up in a situation like that, the best thing you can do is just go in the other direction. Reside unaffected. Don't speak any evil words. Remain with compassion and loving kindness. Loving kindness is a genuine interest in seeing beings be well, having goodwill towards others without judging them. What compassion is the concern for the misfortune of others. So when you see somebody who is perhaps being physical or wanting to be physical with you, then you can reside with compassion and loving kindness for them, concern for their misfortune. You can have this active goodwill towards them. And this is what will extinguish it. I've been in many situations like this in the past where this is what I needed to practice in order to extinguish it, where people were literally confronting me, wanting me to fight or wanting to do something. And by me not doing anything at all and just remaining quiet, speaking no evil words, and in some cases just walking away, it diffused the situation and it didn't go any further. So this is what the Buddha is describing here. Now, of course, if you are in a situation where you need to defend this physical body or defend the mind, say you're in your home and somebody breaks in the middle of the night and you're backed up in a corner, of course, you need to defend the physical body. That wouldn't be having loving kindness and compassion for this being who you are. In order to get to enlightenment, you need to practice loving kindness and compassion for all beings, including this being who you are. If you're living in a family environment, you're going to have loving kindness and compassion for those beings as well. So if somebody broke in and they were literally beating you or beating somebody in your home and you just stood by and did nothing, that would be unwise. You need to be willing and able to take action, whether that's calling the police, whether that's getting something that you can cause as least amount of harm as possible to this individual to stop the harm that's being caused to somebody else. Then you might decide to do those kinds of things. Each situation is unique to itself, so you're going to need to take in the variables and decide what is wise in any one given situation. But where you can, just get away. That's the ideal thing. But if you can't get away and you need to have some kind of defense, then you should feel comfortable doing that and causing as least amount of harm as possible. So let me know what questions you guys have. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions or follow-up questions directly. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere, so I'm going to move on to the next chapter, which is chapter 16, which has something similar to what we just studied, but this one is quite a bit more detailed. It's titled Training a Mind Filled with Loving Kindness Without Hostility or Ill Will. Monks, there are these 5 courses of speech that others may use when they address you. 1. Their speech may be timely or untimely. 2. True or untrue. 3. Gentle or harsh. 4. Connected with benefit or unbeneficial. 5. Spoken with a mind of loving kindness or with inner hate. Herein, monks, you should train thus. Our minds will remain unaffected, and we shall speak no evil words. We shall reside compassionate for their welfare, with a mind of loving kindness, without inner hate. We shall reside enveloping that person with a mind filled with loving kindness, and starting with him, we shall reside enveloping the all-encompassing world with a mind filled with loving kindness, abundant, joyful, immeasurable, without hostility, and without ill will. That is how you should train monks. Monks, suppose a man came with crimson, turmeric, indigo, or carmine, and said, I shall draw pictures and make pictures appear on empty space. What do you think, monks? Could that man draw pictures and make pictures appear on empty space? No, venerable sir. Why is that? Because empty space is formless and invisible. He cannot possibly draw pictures there or make pictures appear there. Eventually, the man would reap only tiredness and disappointment. So too, monks, there are these 5 courses of speech that others may use when they address you. Herein, monks, you should train thus. Our minds will remain unaffected, and we shall speak no evil words. We shall reside compassionate for their welfare, with a mind of loving kindness, without inner hate. We shall reside enveloping them with a mind filled with loving kindness. And, starting with them, we shall reside enveloping the all-encompassing world with a mind filled with loving kindness, abundant, joyful, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. That is how you should train monks. The Buddha also spoke several other similes. A simile of a man who came with a hoe and a basket and said, I shall make this great earth to be without earth. A simile of a man with a blazing grass torch and said, I shall heat up and burn away the river Ganges with the blazing grass torch. Eventually, that man would reap only tiredness and disappointment. Monks, even if criminals were to sever you savagely, limb by limb, with a 2-handed saw, he who gave rise to a mind of hate towards them would not be practicing my teachings. Herein, monks, you should train thus. Our minds will remain unaffected, and we shall speak no evil words. We shall reside compassionate for their welfare, with a mind of loving kindness, without inner hate. We shall reside enveloping them with a mind filled with loving kindness, and starting with them, we shall reside enveloping the all-encompassing world with a mind filled with loving kindness, abundant, joyful, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. That is how you should train monks. Monks, if you keep this advice on the simile of the saw constantly in mind, do you see any course of speech, insignificant or significant, that you could not endure? No, venerable sir. Therefore, monks, you should keep this advice on the simile of the saw constantly in mind. That will lead to your welfare and peacefulness for a long time. So here the Buddha is going into talking about the 5 factors of well-spoken speech, which is what he teaches based on the natural law of karma to help you dial in your speech closer and closer so that you're not causing harm, and therefore your conversations through personal and professional relationships can really blossom and you can have wholesome outcomes to your conversations. That's speaking at the right time, what you say is true, speaking gentle, speaking beneficially, and speaking with a mind of loving kindness. But he's also reminding his students here that people may speak to you in that way, but also people might end up speaking to you in an untimely way, or untrue, or harsh, or unbeneficially, or with a mind of inner hate. Even when you're enlightened, people are potentially going to speak with you like this occasionally. You might run across this as new people might come into your life at different times. You might choose to not associate with those individuals for one reason or another, but you won't experience any painful feelings from it by the time your mind is enlightened. As you're in the process of moving to enlightenment, if someone speaks to you harsh or aggressive or hostile, you might experience painful feelings, but you can overcome that. And the Buddha is explaining to you how to be able to overcome that and extinguish it. So that if somebody's speaking to you in any of these ways, the Buddha is saying that you should remain unaffected. So even when somebody's speaking to you in a very lovely and very gentle way, your mind should remain unaffected. Because if you allow your mind to get all these pleasant feelings when somebody's speaking to you in a very lovely way, then when someone speaks to you in a harsh and aggressive way, you're going to experience painful feelings. So it's important to reside where your mind has no evil words, that you can reside compassionate with loving kindness for all beings, no matter how they're speaking with you. Again, you might choose to associate with individuals who have wise speech and who are doing wholesome things, but occasionally you could encounter somebody, even when the mind's enlightened, where they might be aggressive or hostile or bitter or some other type of way of speaking like that. And then you might just choose to move on. But your mind will be protected by that point where you won't experience any kind of painful feelings. The Buddha is using this first analogy about somebody coming to paint something or draw a picture where there's an empty space and the person wouldn't be able to put their paint on this empty space. And it's the same thing, is that if you practice the universal truth of non-self and you eliminate personal existence view, where you're looking to be perceived in the world a certain way, then when somebody comes at you with harsh or aggressive or bitter speech, there's nothing for it to stick to. This person would just reap only tiredness or disappointment if they were harsh and aggressive and bitter with you, because nothing's going to stick, because there's no self here. But as long as there's the pollution of personal existence view, when somebody says something aggressive or hostile, you might get uncalm, you might get shaken up, your mind might become unsteady in that situation. So practice in such a way that when somebody's speaking with you in an unwise way, you can reside unaffected. And each time this occurs, your mind can become more and more stable in those situations. Then the Buddha gives this next story, which is quite graphic, but this is the way that a Buddha sometimes speaks, particularly a Buddha who's relying on the oral tradition in order for people to remember his teachings. One of the things that a Buddha would do who's relying on the oral tradition to remember his teachings is they would need to speak in these graphic ways in order for the teachings to be committed to memory. Whereas if it was just a very basic, very simple analogy or story, it wouldn't have the penetrating effect of being able to be remembered in the mind long term. So here the Buddha is giving this depiction of two criminals that are severing you limb by limb by limb with a two-handed saw. And the Buddha is saying that if hatred arises in your mind at that time, then this would not be practicing his teachings. Because by the time your mind gets to enlightenment, it's completely impossible for you to experience any kind of hate whatsoever. That the mind just isn't wired that way anymore. In the unenlightened state, you can still have irritation, annoyance, frustration, even hatred at different times. But by the time your mind moves all the way to enlightenment, it's utterly impossible for the mind to experience hate. Even in this type of situation, if somebody was sawing you from limb to limb to limb, you might see that as, kind of far-fetched at this point, depending on where you are in your development of your practice. But I can tell you that this is true, that an enlightened being, it's impossible for them to experience any kind of hatred whatsoever, or even the slightest dislike. It just doesn't exist in the enlightened mind, because the conditions that are causing those things to arise have been eliminated from the mind. The mind's now purified. And the way that you accomplish that is by what the Buddha is explaining here, which is residing with no evil words, having compassion and loving kindness. This is the way that you transform your mind away from the anger, hatred, and ill will. The loving kindness and compassion can permeate in the mind and fill up the mind, and you can get to a point where your mind's essentially been rewired. And this is the way that the Buddha encourages you to train, so that then you can experience this peacefulness and welfare for a very long time for the rest of your life. Let me know what questions you guys have on this by putting it into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions here, so I'm going to move on to the next one. This is chapter 17. It's titled, Reside with a Mind of a Newly Arrived Bride. This is an interesting story as well. And as I read this, keep in mind that the Buddha is using a female gender here as a bride, but we could also describe the same thing as a husband as well. These genders and roles are interchangeable. It just depends on who he's talking to, whether he's talking to a male or a female, and what roles that he might be using. So here he says, monks, when a bride is first brought into the home, whether at night or during the day, at first she sets up a diligent sense of moral wrongdoing and moral concern toward her mother-in-law, her father-in-law, her husband, and even the slaves, workers, and servants. But after some time, as a result of living together in intimacy with them, she says to her mother-in-law, her father-in-law, and her husband, "Go away, what do you know?" So too, when some monk here has gone forth from the household life into homelessness, whether by night or during the day, at first he sets up a diligent sense of moral wrongdoing and moral concern toward the male ordained practitioners, the female ordained practitioners, the male household practitioners, the female household practitioners, and even toward the monastery workers and novices. But after some time, as a result of living together in intimacy with them, he says even to his teacher and preceptor, "Go away, what do you know?" Therefore, monks, you should train yourselves thus. We will reside with a mind like that of a newly arrived bride. It is in such a way that you should train yourselves. So what the Buddha is describing here is that, during the lifetime that he lived, it was very common for once a person gets married that the partner would move into the home and you would live there with your mother-in-law and your father-in-law. And as you first move into a brand new home or a brand new dwelling, you might be on your best behavior and treating everybody really well with this diligence. If you've ever gone and stayed at somebody's house for a few days or a week or so, you might have experienced that where you were just very observant of everything that you were doing, making sure not to upset the apple cart, so to speak, and do everything with the very best intentions, having this moral wrongdoing and moral concern. What moral wrongdoing is knowing what's wise and unwise, or wholesome and unwholesome. What moral concern is not being interested in doing unwise things or unwholesome things. So if one is diligent with a sense of moral wrongdoing and moral concern, they're essentially on their best behavior because they're very aware of what's wise and unwise, and they're disinterested in doing anything that's unwise. But then this bride that he's describing, after living there for some time, gets to the point where they get so comfortable living with mother-in-law, father-in-law, and husband and the workers that live at this particular house that this person is just, "Go away, what do you know? Like, leave me alone," right? They're no longer diligently practicing wise moral conduct. And the Buddha is saying the same thing can occur for an individual who has a particular teacher, that when you first get started with a teacher, you might be on your very best behavior and being very attentive to the way you conduct yourself around that teacher. But then as time goes on, after you get really comfortable with that individual, you might let go of this diligent moral wrongdoing and moral concern, and you might say, "Go away, what do you know?" to your own teacher, the person who's there helping you to grow and develop and cultivate wisdom. And this will be very unwise because as you do that, being disrespectful to a teacher, ultimately that teacher is probably going to decide not to teach you anymore. So the Buddha is describing to his students to reside like a newly arrived bride, essentially maintain your diligent moral wrongdoing and moral concern, where you're aware of what's wise and unwise and wholesome and unwholesome, and you're disinterested in doing unwise and unwholesome things. This is what's going to lead to the improvement to the condition of the mind. If you allow the mind to become complacent, and now because of living closely with others, you lack the wisdom and you are lacking in the moral conduct and you're conducting yourself in ways that are unwise, then your mind isn't practicing these good wholesome teachings. While it can be a challenge as you're bringing your practice up and running, what you'll notice is it becomes easier and easier as you go forward and you get to the point where your mind is more transformed. There can surely be struggles, difficulties, and challenges along the way to maintain your practice. And where you have missteps, you can apologize and let an individual know that you've made a mistake and that you accept your responsibility for having made that mistake. But if you get to the point where you're pushing away a teacher, or here the Buddha's talking about a preceptor, this is an individual who is supporting you to become ordained, because he's talking to ordained practitioners. If you push the people away from you that are there to help you and support you, then you're not going to be able to learn the wisdom that you need to overcome the difficulties and challenges and transform the mind to the enlightened mind. So this is a very interesting story. Again, you could use multiple genders here. Here he's talking about a bride being a female, but it could easily be a male gender or any other gender that might exist at any time. So let me know what questions you guys have here. I will take a look at Facebook and YouTube and see if you guys have any questions. And I'll also look at Zoom here and see if you guys have any there as well. I'm not seeing any questions, so I'm going to move on to the next chapter, which is chapter 18. Here, this one is titled 5 Factors of Well-Spoken Speech. Monks, possessing 5 factors, speech is well-spoken, not badly spoken. It is blameless and beyond reproach or disapproval by the wise. What 5? 1. It is spoken at the proper time. 2. What is said is true. 3. It is spoken gently. 4. What is said is beneficial. 5. It is spoken with a mind of loving kindness. Possessing these 5 factors, speech is well spoken, not badly spoken. It is blameless and beyond reproach, disapproval by the wise. So these are the 5 factors of well-spoken speech that I introduce students to in the group learning program and in volume 1 of the book series. And I go through in detail explaining what each of these 5 factors are. And I even explain that here in this book as well. I explain the proper time. I talk about speaking the truth, speaking gently and what that means, beneficially, and then also with a mind of loving kindness. You can be reading this and you can understand what these factors are, because these teachings, they're not rules. They're not something that you need to follow as a rule. Instead, the Buddha is explaining to you the natural law of karma, of cause and effect. So you can take these 5 factors and see in situations where you weren't practicing these, the conversation didn't go well. It ended badly. And there's been situations where you've been practicing these maybe, and you didn't even realize you were practicing all 5 factors, and your conversations went really well. And when you can reflect on that and you can dial in your practice more and more with all the people around you where you're practicing all 5 factors, then you can get to the point where your conversations and your relationships are going very smoothly and effortless because you've trained your mind to speak this way. So speaking at the proper time, there's 3 aspects to this. Ensuring that you're not interrupting people, ensuring that your mind is capable of speaking. Like if you're angry or frustrated or irritated, it's the wrong time to speak. And then also ensuring that it's the proper time for the person you're speaking to. Whereas if they just got home from work and they've had a really hard day, it's the wrong time to be speaking about something that's really important and really impactful. So those are the 3 aspects of proper time. Speaking the truth is all about ensuring that you're always speaking the truth, that you're a true speaker and being dependable, that you're not deceiving people. Speaking gently is all about your tone, your tempo, and your word choice. You need to pay a lot of attention to that, particularly in the English language, because tone, tempo, and word choice can really add some extra meaning to a particular phrase or a particular conversation that you're having. So you can be sure to use words that are very gentle. So we can use words like sir or ma'am or thank you or please or things of this nature. This will really help you to ensure that you're speaking gently. So pay attention to your tone, your tempo, and your word choice, and this will help produce the very best results for you in your conversations. What beneficial means is if you think back to the Eightfold Path where the Buddha talks about frivolous speech or idle chatter, this is where somebody has craving to talk and they're just talk, and they're just talking. It's almost like they're broadcasting. It's not a conversation, it's a broadcast. And they might be talking for 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes with nobody else able to actually step in and have a conversation. So you would like to speak in beneficial ways where the things that you're talking about are of some benefit to the people that you're interacting with, and that there's an interaction and a conversation. And then the 5th factor is with a mind of loving kindness. The opposite of this would be a mind of inner hate or anger. If you're speaking with a mind of loving kindness, your conversations will have the best opportunity to be very wholesome and be conducted with ease, and you can have very successful relationships. Where if you're speaking with inner hate, that's what's going to come out from your mind, because your mind has that inner hate, and now it's going to come through in your words, and this is going to produce unbeneficial results in your relationships. So you would like to work on practicing all 5 of these with every single person in your life. As you have craving, desire, attachment in certain relationships, it'll be more and more challenging for you to practice this in those relationships. But by using breathing mindfulness meditation in generosity to bring down your craving, desire, attachment, you'll find that it becomes easier to practice the 5 factors of well-spoken speech when you don't have craving, desire, attachment in the mind. So this is something that you're going to need to dial in closer and closer, and you're going to have missteps. And where you make mistakes, you can apologize and let people know that you're a work in progress and that you're working on it if you like. Other people around you probably aren't speaking this way, but if you're aspiring to get to enlightenment, you're going to need to learn to talk in this way where you're speaking at the proper time, what you say is true, you're speaking gentle, beneficial, and with a mind of loving kindness. And understand that that's a gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress. You're not going to be able to just snap your fingers and start practicing this. It takes time to develop this, particularly in relationships where you have craving, desire, attachment. So let me know what questions you guys have on this chapter. Again, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. All right, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere on any of our platforms. So let's go to the next chapter, which is chapter 19. Chapter 19 is titled, Seeing One Another in Future Lives. Monks, if both husband and wife aspire to see one another, not only in this present life, but also in future lives, they should have the same confidence, the same virtuous behavior, the same generosity, and the same wisdom. Then they will see one another not only in this present life, but also in future lives. Both husband and wife are enriched with confidence, charitable and mentally disciplined, living their lives righteously, addressing each other with pleasant words. Then many benefits accumulate to them, and they reside at ease. Their enemies are saddened when both are the same in virtue, moral conduct, having practiced the teachings here, the same in virtuous behavior and observances, delighting after death in a heavenly world, they rejoice enjoying sensual pleasures. So the first thing I'd like to say is that the goal of the teachings of the Buddha is not to be reborn in a future life. Instead, your goal is to end the cycle of rebirth by getting to enlightenment in this life. But during the lifetime of the Buddha, it was much more challenging for a household practitioner to get to enlightenment than it is today. There were people during the lifetime of the Buddha that got to enlightenment as a household practitioner, but because there was so many chores and so many things just to sustain your basic necessities to survive during that time frame 2,500 years ago, they didn't have as much time as we have nowadays to attend classes, to read books, to meditate, to gain guidance and seek guidance from a teacher. So household practitioners really had a hard time to get to enlightenment during the lifetime of the Buddha. So a lot of times the Buddha is talking to household practitioners in ways of learning and practicing the teachings so that they can improve their rebirth in their next life. But the same things that lead to enlightenment are the same things that lead to an improved rebirth as well. Or another way to say that is the same things that lead to a rebirth and an improved rebirth are the same things that lead to enlightenment. So when you're seeing the Buddha talk about certain qualities to practice that would lead to an improved rebirth, you should look to practice those same things in this life so that you can get to enlightenment and escape the whole cycle of rebirth. You're living in a time where we figured out water systems, educational systems, food systems, and things that make time much more available to us in our daily life. So much so that some people tend to fill up their life with certain tasks that really don't have benefit whatsoever, like maybe spending 6 hours just scrolling the internet or watching YouTube videos or doing different things like this, that they're not necessarily putting their time and effort towards things that could produce benefit for them, like reading the books of the teachings of the Buddha or coming to a class or meditating or things like this. So here the Buddha is describing that for two people who are life partners, here he's talking to a husband and wife, that if they have these same practices of confidence, virtuous behavior, generosity, and wisdom, then they have the ability to see each other in a future life, meaning they will be reborn into a certain realm at the same time. And they're not necessarily going to be husband and wife in that new existence, but they can be reborn into a new existence, and perhaps their brother and sister, or their brother and brother, or sister and sister, or something of this nature. So the qualities that he's talking about cultivating here are same qualities that you would need to get to enlightenment. Whenever you see him talking about confidence, this is confidence in him, his teachings, in the community. That over time, as you build your confidence through learning, through reflecting to independently verify, and through practicing his teachings, you eliminate more and more doubt about his teachings and about him. And then you'll gain this confidence because you'll see the improvement to the condition of the mind. That things where you were once angry or hateful or frustrated or irritated or annoyed, you'll see that your mind can be quite peaceful and joyful in those situations. So developing confidence is going to help lead to your enlightenment. And if you're in a partnership with a husband or wife or some other relationship, if you guys are both confident in the teachings and the Buddha and developing your minds on the path to enlightenment, this will be very wonderful for your relationship. Same thing as if you guys have good virtuous behavior, if you have moral conduct where you're practicing right speech, right action, and right livelihood, this would be really wonderful for your relationship. As well as practicing generosity, where you're giving and sharing, even giving and sharing with each other and other people as well. Where when you're out at the store, you think about your partner and you maybe bring home some small little item. And this will show your partner that you have generosity for them and that you're thinking about them. You can do little simple things that don't cost much money. You can share your time, your effort, your energy, and your resources by practicing generosity with your partner and with others. This is going to help you eliminate craving, desire, attachment, and it's also going to help your relationships really grow and blossom. And then the Buddha talks about wisdom. Wisdom is what's going to lead to your enlightenment. You need to be able to cultivate your wisdom through learning his teachings, reflecting on them to independently verify them, and then practice them. And then as you're practicing and you're transforming your mind, this is where you see the improvement to the condition of the mind. So here the Buddha is explaining about how to live with a partner and that this would be very helpful. One of the things that you can keep in mind is addressing each other with pleasant words. Sometimes, like that newly arrived bride, you might be on your best behavior when you first get into a relationship with somebody, but then over time you become more complacent. If you can maintain your ability to speak to your partner with pleasant words, this will keep your relationship uplifted and on a very wholesome note. This is very helpful for you in your relationship. And as the Buddha says, if you guys having a really good relationship, this would sadden your enemies, right? Anybody who's being hateful or vindictive or trying to break you guys up, this would really sadden them if you guys have a really wonderful relationship and you're both practicing this great moral conduct. So the Buddha does, of course, talk about how this can lead to a rebirth where you guys are together, but the ultimate goal would be for both of you to get to enlightenment, and there is no more rebirth in the cycle of rebirth. But the same things that lead to this improved rebirth are the same things that lead to enlightenment. So focus on cultivating your confidence, virtuous behavior, generosity, and wisdom, and that's what's going to lead to an improved condition of mind and an improved condition of your life. Let me know what questions you guys have on this chapter. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions here. So let's go to the very last chapter for today, which is chapter 20. Here, this one is titled 7 Kinds of Wives. I'll read the whole thing for you guys so you can understand this. This is another story where he's talking with a female and helping her to understand the teachings. But again, you could replace this with other genders and other roles as well. So it could be a male with husbands and things of this nature as well. Then in the morning, the perfectly enlightened one dressed, took his bowl and robe, and went to the residence of the householder, this particular individual, where he sat down on the seat that was prepared for him. Now, on that occasion, people in this person's residence were making an uproar and a disturbance. Then the householder approached the perfectly enlightened one, paid homage or respect to him, and sat down to one side. The perfectly enlightened one then said to him, "Householder, why are people in your residence making such an uproar and a disturbance? One would think it was fishermen at a haul of fish. This, venerable sir, is my daughter-in-law, Sujata, who is rich and has been brought here from a rich family. She doesn't obey her father-in-law, her mother-in-law, or her husband. She doesn't even honor, respect, appreciate, and venerate the perfectly enlightened one." Then the perfectly enlightened one addressed Sujata. "Come here, Sujata." "Yes, venerable sir," she replied. She went to the perfectly enlightened one, paid homage, respect to him, and sat down to one side. The perfectly enlightened one then said to her, "Sujata, a man might have 7 kinds of wives." "What 7? "One like a killer, one like a thief, one like a tyrant, one like a mother, one like a sister, one like a friend, and one like a helper. A man might have these 7 kinds of wives. Which one are you?" "Venerable sir, I do not understand in detail the meaning of this statement that the perfectly enlightened one has spoken in brief. Please let the perfectly enlightened one teach me the teachings in such a way that I might understand in detail the meaning of this statement spoken in brief." "Then listen and attend closely, Sujata. I will speak." "Yes, venerable sir," she replied. The perfectly enlightened one said this: 1. With hateful mind, lacking of compassion, lusting for others, despising her husband, she seeks to kill the one who bought her with wealth. A wife like this is called a wife and a killer. 2. When the wife's husband acquires wealth by hard labor at a craft, trade, or farming, she tries to steal it, even if he earns but little. A wife like this is called a wife and a thief. The lazy glutton, unwilling to work, harsh, fierce, rough in speech, a woman who dominates her own supporters, a wife like this is called a wife and a tyrant. 4. One always compassionate and sympathetic, who guards her husband as a mother would guard her son, who protects the wealth he earns. A wife like this is called a wife and a mother. 5. She holds her husband in high regard, as a younger sister would her elder brother, careful to do task well, following her husband's will. A wife like this is called a wife and a sister. 6. One who rejoices when she sees her husband, as if seeing a friend after long absence, well raised, virtuous, devoted to her husband. A wife like this is called a wife and a friend. 7. One who remains patient and calm when threatened with violence by the rod, who tolerates her husband with a mind free of hate, patient, accommodating to her husband's intentions. A wife like this is called a wife and a helper. The types of wives here called a killer, a thief, and a tyrant: unwholesome, harsh, disrespectful, with the body's breakup go to hell. But the types of wives here called mother, sister, friend, and helper, firm in virtue, long restrained, with the body's breakup go to heaven. A man, Sujata, might have these 7 kinds of wives. Now, which one are you? Beginning today, venerable sir, let the perfectly enlightened one consider me a wife who is like a helper. Okay, so here the Buddha is helping an individual to get along in their house with their in-laws as well as with their husband. And he's just guiding this individual to understand these 7 different types of individuals who could potentially be functioning in these particular ways. And what you can do with a discourse like this is you can take the individual ones that he's talking about here that would be unwise and unwholesome, and you can choose that you're not interested in being this kind of person in any kind of relationship that you're in. So if you have a mind that is hateful, lacking compassion, lusting for others, despising your partner, then this is the one who is functioning like a killer, and you're not interested in having those qualities. You're also not interested in having the qualities of stealing the wealth of your partner. When somebody's earning money and they're taking a long time to earn money, or they're working really hard, or they're out there trying to acquire a certain amount of income for the family, don't look to steal the money and kind of squander it. Look to use it for beneficial things that are going to help the home and help the family. And then this third one that you're not interested in doing is being lazy or a glutton, unwilling to work, harsh, fierce, rough in speech, someone who dominates the people who support you. This is the Buddhist saying is a person like a tyrant. So any of those qualities that you might see in your own mind, where you're practicing those in your partnerships, eliminate those from the mind. And then work to cultivate these qualities that he's talking about. Even though he's talking about them as separate individuals, you're looking to cultivate all these qualities because it would be really helpful. Where one is compassionate, sympathetic, guarding your partner like a mother would protect their son, and protecting the wealth that they earn. And again, using it for beneficial purposes in the household. That you think about your partner in high regard, like a younger sister would think of an older brother, carefully doing your task. This would be wise, right? That you're paying attention to the things that you're doing around the home, that you're not just haphazardly doing things in the home, but you're intentionally conducting certain tasks. Maybe you're cleaning a bathroom, maybe you're vacuuming, maybe you're washing dishes, things like this, that this would be very helpful, whether you're a male or a female, to be able to then practice in such a way that's contributing to the household, and that you're also holding your partner in this high regard. And then one who rejoices when you see your partner, like a friend after a long absence, that you would be devoted to your partner. This is very wise as well, that you have this thrilling feeling, or that you're interested in seeing your partner, that it's not just like, all right, well, they're home now, so what? Right? That you're like, oh, hey, how are you? You're home. How's it going? You know, like having very positive and uplifting words. And then this seventh one is where one is patient and calm, even when threatened by violence. This doesn't mean that if your partner is threatening you with violence that you should stay in the relationship. Instead, the Buddha is saying by somebody else, if somebody else was threatening you with violence, that you would be able to remain patient and calm, that your mind wouldn't be shaken up by it, and that you understand that you're not going to agree with every single thing that your partner is doing, that you're going to need to have a certain amount of patience, that you have a mind free of hate, that you don't hate your partner. If you hate your life partner or any kind of relationship that you're in, this is an indication of what's going on in your mind. Oftentimes we think if you hate somebody, it's because of what somebody else is doing. But this is what's going on in your own mind. You can eliminate that hate, and you can practice patience. The way that you eliminate hate is through practicing loving kindness meditation. And by transforming your mind in meditation, then through your intention, speech, and actions, you can start practicing more and more loving kindness. So you can do this in a relationship with a partnership, like the Buddha is talking about here, but also any relationship. These are all really helpful qualities in a partnership where you're living and residing with somebody, or you're just in a close, intimate relationship with somebody. These are wise ways to practice that's going to promote the best success in your relationships with a partner. So let me know what questions you guys have on this chapter. Again, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Or in Zoom, you can raise your hand electronically and ask any questions that you like. All right, looks like Max has a question. You can go ahead, Max.
Can you talk about maybe having excitement for saying like your loved one versus being overly excited, and is there like a fine line between that?
Yeah, it's a difference between having conditioned feelings versus having enthusiasm, right? So like you can have enthusiasm without conditioned pleasant feeling. So conditioned pleasant feeling is, wow, mommy's home, look, yay, mommy's home, yay. And then when mommy's gone, it's like, oh, I'm so sad, I'm missing mommy so much, right? So if you allow your mind to have those conditioned pleasant feelings, then when that condition isn't there, then there's going to be this sadness or disappointment, or this person's going to miss the other person, right? So like, for example, when I see my wife, she either comes home or I walk in and she's here, I'd be like, hey, mommy's here. What's up, mommy? How you doing? What have you been up to today, right? There's this enthusiasm when I see her. It's not just like, oh, hey, what are you doing? Like, where you been all day? What have you been up to? It's like, hey, mom. In Thai, we call mami ja. This is like a way of saying like mommy. Hey, mommy. Like, hey, mommy, what you been up to? How you doing? What do you got going on today? It's like kind of being enthusiastic without the conditioned feelings of excitement. So that's what the Buddha's talking about here, is by having this uplifted mind where you can greet each other in a warm and loving way, and you can have enthusiasm when you see each other. It's like, hey, there's the person that I'm in a great relationship with. Hey, there's my life partner. Hey, there's the person who knows me so well. Hey, there's my really best friend who's been through so many challenges and struggles in my life together. Hey, how are you doing? Right? It's like seeing this person that you have this, real deep relationship with, rather than just like, yeah, hey, how are you? Like, what are you up to? Oh, okay, whatever. Like, you would like to add some enthusiasm to it. So, but it's not this fake enthusiasm. It's not a, acting. It's not conditioned feelings, but it's this genuine interest in seeing this person. And it's like, wow, there's like this spark of enthusiasm that comes through in your voice as you interact with this person.
Okay, that makes sense. I guess another question along that would kind of go with this is that when you're away from someone for a long time, instead of, someone will say, oh, I miss you or whatnot, and I typically just say, oh, I look forward to seeing you. Is that the right speech?
Yeah, there's no harm in what you said. There isn't just like one stock answer that is like the right answer. So if somebody's saying that they miss you, this is because of either they have a craving, desire, attachment to you, and when you're gone, they're missing you. Or some people just think that's the polite thing to say when somebody's gone, is like to say, I miss you. Oftentimes people think it's the love that's causing that, but it's not. So if somebody said to me like, hey, I missed you, I'd be like, oh, really? Okay, I understand. Or, something like that, different situation, different relationship, different variables, I'm going to respond differently. Part of having a higher consciousness is that you take in the variables of the situation and you respond accordingly, and there's not going to be just one permanent answer. But what you just said, there's no harm in that speech of what you just said. So from that perspective, yes, it's right speech, but I wouldn't stay tied to that as that's like a stock answer of every time somebody says, I miss you, that you say the same thing all the time, because this would be like a robot going through the world. And if you have those kinds of stock replies, it can become very insincere, and life can become very unmotivating, because you just kind of go through your drawer of standard replies. Whenever you hear this, I give this standard reply. It's almost very robotic and almost like programmed like a computer. So by you taking in the variables, then you can reply in a warm, friendly way, no matter what situation you're in, using those 5 factors of well-spoken speech.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Yes, you're welcome. Okay, let me take a look to see if we have any questions coming in anywhere else. All right, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere else. So what I'll do then is just thank all of you guys for coming to class and choosing to learn today and making today a day that you're learning the teachings of the Buddha. Next Saturday, we're going to be in the next 10 chapters of the book, which is chapters 21 through 30. So if you'd like to study those ahead of time, you can. Or you can even just come to class and study, but you'll get more benefit if you're reading either before class and or after class, because you've got the words of the Buddha that you can really sit with and reflect on. Then you've got guidance from me that you can also reflect on as well as part of each one of these chapters. You can be reading 10, 15, 20 minutes a day and gradually making your way through these over the course of the week. And then that way, when you come to class, you might have certain questions. Tomorrow in our group learning program, we're going to be studying Chapter 2 of Volume 1, which is Why Study Gautama Buddha's Teachings. You're welcome to come to that class and study with us. It's a very different type of study. This is more of a study group, this particular class, where the group learning program is more of a traditional style of learning, where I'm sharing teachings and providing an opportunity for students to learn and digest a certain amount of teachings and ask questions. So you're always welcome to come to the Sunday classes, and I teach those at the temple in the morning, and I teach it in the evening as well, just like this class and all the others now. Saturday, Sunday, and Wednesday, they're being taught in the morning, in the evening, Thai time. So that's giving you 2 opportunities to join classes or listen to the replays so that you can get access to the teachings and ask any questions that you like. On Wednesday, we're going to be in our 3rd part of a 4-part series where I'm teaching loving kindness meditation. So you're welcome and invited to all of these classes and courses and programs. We have retreats coming up next year. You're welcome to attend any of these, either here in Thailand or online. So thank you all for joining for today's class. We'll see you guys in a future class. Have a wonderful and lovely rest of your day. Sawadee krap.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To provide support for this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha. To access more teachings, visit buddhadailywisdom.com. There, you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Remember to establish a daily, consistent meditation practice, along with learning and practicing these teachings. A well-developed meditation practice is the foundation in which to train the mind to attain enlightenment.